get much better than this. Our topic, hey, with Liam Coen and the Buccaneers, man, this kind of stuff writes itself. Thanks so much for joining us. What was your kind of initial thoughts when this news came out today?
Yeah, I wasn't shocked because I think we kind of got the idea, the feeling that Liam Coen, when he spoke, it might have been before the last game or before the playoff game, when he said, "Hey, I'm 39 years old. I don't necessarily need to be a head coach right now." And it kind of gave us some insight into what he was thinking. I'm going to do the interviews. I'm going to put myself out there, get the experience. It's important for these guys to see what organizations want, to make sure they are prepared for whether it's now or down the road, to have a coaching staff, have everything in place in mind. But at the same time, he wasn't necessarily eager to go running out the door if the right fit wasn't there. And if it came down to a situation like Jacksonville, where Trent Baalke's on his fourth head coach since he's been there since 2021, and a team that just had 2 winning seasons with a Super Bowl winning head coach in Doug Peterson. Things go just completely awful for them this year. He's out the door. You want stability as a head coach. You want to make sure that you're in an organization that's set up to win. And being in Tampa Bay, being with the Buccaneers, Jason Light is a GM who obviously has that pedigree. And listen, I'm biased. I live in the Tampa Bay area. If I could live anywhere where there's an NFL team, and I have that option, I chose to be here. Like, this is a great place to live, a great place to raise a family. And I think getting more money, Jay, for Liam Coen, and potentially the possibility of, depending what happens in the future with Todd Bowles and the Buccaneers, that could be his job. So people have talked about, well, the New England Patriots and his history there, and that could have been his dream job, his dream scenario, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe as a kid growing up. But obviously they went in a different direction with Mike Vrabel, and perhaps the Buccaneers in the long run will be Liam Cohen's dream job. I think it's a huge win for Baker Mayfield, this offense, this team, this organization, that he gets to stay, that he's sticking around. And it was great that they stepped up and paid him to make sure that he's up there with the upper echelon, the top tier of coordinators.
Rob, do you think this had more to do with, or how much do you think this had to do with the instability of the Jacksonville Jaguars and the stability of the Buccaneers? Because I think a lot of it, if this was an ideal situation, in my opinion, in Jacksonville, where it's like the owner, the GM, you have the franchise quarterback there. So I think it would have been, okay, maybe this might be the opportunity for me to go. You're not leaving too far from Tampa. I think it had to do with a little bit of both the stability and the instability. What do you say to that?
100%. I think it's a combination. I think you look at only Liam would know how much he weighed into Jacksonville's instability and what he has here in Tampa Bay. Is it a 75, 25, 50, 50? But I think it's a combination. If it was a perfect scenario and you have an opportunity to be a head coach and you got a franchise quarterback that you feel really is that guy, I think there's some questions, Jay, about Trevor Lawrence. I think there's some, and he's been paid to be an elite guy. He's been paid to be a franchise quarterback. He's led him to that playoff win where they came back down 27, 24, nothing, whatever it was at halftime. But I think there are some legitimate questions about his accuracy, whether or not, if Doug Peterson couldn't take him to another level, and we know what Doug Peterson did. I was there in Philly when he took Carson Wentz from 2016 as a rookie to 2017 MVP candidate, and then won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. And then obviously there was some regression there with Carson Wentz. But we all thought Doug Peterson teamed up with Trevor Lawrence is going to be that next step that Trevor needs to become a top tier, an elite quarterback in the NFL. And certainly Liam Coen could be a guy who could have helped him do that. We saw the success he had with Baker Mayfield, but there's no guarantees there, and there's some question marks there. So I think there's some instability there. The GM situation, he could be on his last high. There could be some, and there have been some issues in the past, right, with Jim Harbaugh and Trent in San Francisco. So that could have been a little bit of a detraction for Liam. But I think when you compare that to what he has with the Buccaneers, knowing that they had a ton of success this year, but they still left a lot on it. They should have won that game against the Washington Commanders. As great of a story as the Commanders and Jaden Daniels are, and they're in the NFC Championship game, and they went into Detroit and won that game and upset the number 1 seed. They were this close, a yard maybe, from losing to the Buccaneers in that wild card game, 2nd and 1, and 3rd and 1, and things go awry for the Bucs. So they know how close they are to potentially being that team in the NFC Championship game playing for a Super Bowl.
Rob, what do you make of the Buccaneers on the defensive side of the ball? And we saw Casey Rogers. It looks like he's interviewing with the Packers, amongst other guys that are trying to fortify their defensive line with a better coach. But what changes do you think they need to make so that they're having a defense that rivals this kind of burgeoning and growing offense?
Yeah, it's the biggest issue they have. It's their defense that held them back this year. It's held them back going back to, Jay, you can go to the Rams divisional round playoff game where they were down 27-3, fought all the way back to tie that game. Looked like you were going to go to overtime, and then there's the defensive collapse in the final 30 seconds where Cooper Kupp catches 2 deep balls and they set up a game-winning field goal, and Brady can't go for back-to-back. And I think, and obviously the next year or two, they had some issues in the run game that kind of took away from their ability to have a balanced offense, and that was a little bit of a problem. But this year, you put it all on the defense. And injuries in the secondary, and Antoine Winfield being down all pro last year and not being able to play up to that level, I think really hurt the team. But they got to get after the quarterback day. It starts there. You look at the elite teams, you look at the teams who can win the biggest games, and you have absolute game records. The Chiefs, they got Chris Jones. Look at the Eagles. Look at the Rams. They got to the point last week and they drafted Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, and those are 2 guys. And they replaced Aaron Donald. The Eagles got Jalen Carter. They've got other guys who can dominate up front. And the Buccaneers, other Vita Vea in the middle, right? But you got to get to the quarterback from the edge. So I think that's a huge need for them. And I think Jason Light will address that in the offseason. Got to find somebody who can get after the quarterback, whether it's a first-round pick, whether it's somebody in free agency, address the secondary. And as much as I think we all love Levante David and what he's been able to do for the franchise, and he's still a big-time leader on this team, they are getting older at that position, and they still need to be able to address the linebacking spot. But edge rusher, to me, is the primary area where they have to go out and get somebody. And obviously, Todd Bowles' defense has taken a little bit of a hit the past couple of years, and it's time for Todd to figure things out, and he's got to get the pieces, too, at the same time.
Rob, slide a little bit closer to the mic if you can, because I just lost you a little bit at the end, if you don't mind. There you go. Sorry, buddy, because I want to. You're giving me some gold nuggets here, man, and I love it. Tell me I'm crazy. I think the Bucs should make a move for Max Crosby, and I hate when people are like, trade for this guy, because it isn't fantasy football, right? But I feel like, and I watched him because I did have him on my fantasy team, and I watched him. I love watching great players on bad teams. Because, Rob, and you know this as well as anybody, you really see a lot. You see if these guys tap out. You see if these guys half-assed on any of these plays. This guy, even though everything is going wrong around him, is busting his ass on every single play. He's 27. I know how much he makes, but this is a guy, even when he's not getting to the quarterback, he's making plays on the defense. Even if it's not Max Crosby, and I know this usually isn't Jason Light's thing because he builds through the draft, but does he need to make that type of move to bring in a guy, whether it's a free agent or a trade, to help that defense? Because you're not going to be able to get a corner, get an inside linebacker, get a pass rush that can be a big-time contributor and a game wrecker in year one. I mean, we see it with Tristan Wirfs and Antoine Winfield Jr., but it doesn't happen like that. I mean, you had 2 anomalies in one season to help you win the Super Bowl. Does Jason Light need to make a move like that, a big move for an established star, to kind of help speed up that process when it comes to the development of defense?
Well, obviously, we've seen that the Buccaneers aren't afraid to make a big splash for an established star to come in and be the final piece, and that was Tom Brady in 2020. Right. This would be a different scenario if you're going after someone like Max Crosby, who's not a free agent, and the assets that you're going to have to trade. It's happened in the NFL before. We saw Khalil Mack get traded several years ago, right? And he went for a big package. You have to consider that as an option if you feel you can't get what you need in the draft. If they feel that they can get an edge in the draft, maybe then the trade isn't for a Max Crosby. Maybe the trade then is for somebody, some secondary help The Lions were able to go get from the Buccaneers Carlton Davis last year, and he helped solidify until they had all kinds of injuries there. I think there are players that are going to be potentially available. You look at Philly secondary; they've got an abundance of young talent. Darius Slay may be a guy who he's getting a little bit older, still playing at a high level. Might be a guy that you can get for cheap down the road in this offseason, or a little bit cheaper than some of these guys. I think there's a move, Jay, that has to be made that involves bringing in a player on another team through trade. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be a Max Crosby type player where you're giving up 2 or 3 top tier draft picks, whether it's a couple first rounders or a first and 2 seconds, or those assets are they're held like gold. They're so valued by NFL teams. So I'm with you when it comes to making a splash when you feel you're that close. They're close enough to where a guy like Max Crosby can impact this defense, assuming the offense can continue to play at the level they were or slightly better. They don't need to take major strides forward on offense. They need to on defense. I would think you explore that, or as they say, right, you kick the tires on everything. You kick the tires, you see what it takes, you see what and maybe somebody's disgruntled with a contract. Maybe he becomes a little more available for a lesser price. Some guys who might maybe potentially get franchised or not, they could become available. All of these got to be options. They all got to be on the table because the defense needs to be in order for them to compete. You're not trying to compete with the other teams in the NFC South. You've dominated and haven't dominated, but you've won a division for the last 4 years, and you've barely squeaked by winning it 3 times in the past 3 years. But you're competing with the other teams in the NFC because the goal is a Super Bowl. The goal is not winning the division title. The goal is not getting to the next round or the championship round. It's what do you have to do to be in the conversation with the teams that are hoisting the Lombardi Trophy? And that starts with fortifying the defense, and you got to find a way somehow to build that defense. Like the Rams formula, and they didn't even make it to the NFC Championship game. They were able to get 2 rookies to really impact that defense in verse and fist. And if those guys are available, they got to figure it out from the scouting department on down.
Who are you leaning towards in these championship games this weekend? Obviously, we know it seemed like we were destined for Eagles and Lions, and whether it was the Ravens or the Bills against the Chiefs, and Washington had other plans. But yeah, AFC, NFC, who are you leaning towards in those games?
Jay, I got a dilemma because I picked the Eagles to beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl as my preseason pick. So I've got 2 of the 4 teams for my preseason pick. They're right there. So I can't not take those teams right now because they're so close. But I feel like Washington has a real opportunity, and Buffalo has a legitimate opportunity to go into Kansas City and win. It wouldn't surprise me if both visiting teams won these games. It wouldn't surprise me if it was a split and if it didn't go the way I had predicted way back in September. I have to make all my picks today on Wednesday. So I'm looking at the lines. I'm looking at the games. I'm probably I'm going to stick with what I predicted before the season. It's right there for me. So I'm going to take Eagles and Chiefs advancing. I'm pretty certain I'm going to take the Commanders to cover the 6 points. I think if the Eagles win, it's going to be a field goal game or less. And what should concern Philly is Jake Elliott hasn't been dominant for them or even close to it as a field goal kicker. And I think all Bucs fans know Zane Gonzalez was clutch in that game, in a wild card game, but he's also been inconsistent. And the line in Kansas City, it's against Buffalo, I think is only 2. If I can get it at 2.5, I might take Buffalo to cover in a 1-point game and try to hedge my bets. But I'm going to take the Eagles and the Chiefs just because I did it way back in August, early September. So I think that's the way I'm going to lean. Washington's got a real shot, though. They got a real shot. Jaden Daniels has been so impressive, and Jalen Hurts being banged up his knee. If his mobility is at all limited, that can impact the game because we know Saquon can go off for 200, but if you're putting 8, 9 men in a box to stop Saquon, it's going to be on Jalen to make some plays. And if Jalen can't move around the way he's used to, he's got the weapons. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, he's got the guys there. He just needs time to be able to hit them. They do have a dominant offensive line. The only team in football with 5 players on the offensive line who all received at least one All-Pro vote. That was the Eagles.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I'm with you. I look at a guy like Jalen Hurts, and I wonder, like, hey, those numbers were not great in the playoff game against the Rams with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Was that because Saquon ran for 200, or because he doesn't, because there's something off with Jalen Hurts. Just what there's a little bit of a hitch in his giddy up. He just doesn't look as spry to me, and maybe because it was snow and the inclement weather. I know he's still working his way back from the concussion. But I just wonder if that's going to rear its ugly head against Washington. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about your baseball Hall of Fame ballot. I picked 4 guys yesterday on the podcast. I had CeCe, I had Ichiro, I had Billy Wagner, I had Omar Vizquel. I'm partial to Omar. I think he's the second best defensive shortstop behind Ozzie Smith. And I think that it can't just be all offense all the time. We have Devin Hester at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So that shows you like there's got to be different kind of parameters for guys making it in. I saw your ballot. Any surprises for you when you heard who got in last night?
I was surprised a little bit that Carlos Beltran wasn't able to finally get over that hump. What I don't like, Jay, is that Billy Wagner had to wait 10 years. He's in the Hall of Fame. So why didn't he make it on the first try?
Right.
Like, there are voters, and I appreciate being a voter. I love the process, and it's an honor and it's a privilege. But some guys look at players and go, well, he's not a first ballot. I'll vote him down the road. I vote for guys who I feel should belong in the Hall of Fame, and it doesn't matter if it's first ballot, second ballot, third ballot. And then you clog the ballot because they're still carried over. And, of course, we had all the guys like Alex Rodriguez, Hall of Famer. Let's just get him in there, get it over with. Manny Ramirez, Hall of Famer. Barry Bonds should have been in the Hall of Fame. Roger Clement, all these guys I voted for because I vote for the numbers. I look at it strictly based upon the numbers. We don't know who took what, when, how it impacted their game, their ability. The guys who took amphetamines in the 70s and 80s and whatever it was, it may have helped their hand-eye coordination. Maybe not necessarily that helps you hit a football, helps you hit a baseball a whole lot better than guys who are all jacked up. So I think we got to vote strictly on the numbers. CeCe gets in there. Why not Andy Pettitte? Andy Pettitte was a big game pitcher too. He's got the numbers and he's got those postseason numbers. So I think he should have got in. Chase Utley, his numbers compared to second baseman in the Hall of Fame are right there. And I don't have the stats as handy. Maybe here we go. If you got 1 second, I'll pull them up. But you look at Chase Utley compared to other guys in the Hall of Fame at that position, and I can't find them right now. When you need them, you don't have them. But they're like top 5 home runs and on base and slugging and all of that. You got to compare the guys at the position that they played. That's why Omar, he's got a legitimate right that he should be in the Hall of Fame. As you said, if not a top 2, top 3 defensive player of all time. And I think as my ballot allows, because there's a limit, you can only vote for 10. And I felt that there were 10 worthy candidates. Andrew Jones, I felt, is worthy for that same reason. That combination of speed, power, and defense. For a while there, Andrew Jones was absolutely the best center fielder in MLB. And then Jimmy Rollins at shortstop, I think he's probably, 7, 8, 18%, whatever it was. At shortstop, his combination of speed, power, defense compares with everyone. Like maybe compares right there with Barry Larkin, who's in the Hall of Fame. So there are some guys who certainly have absolute, legitimate, valid gripes for not getting in. It was good to see Billy Wags get in there because he was maybe one of the top 2 or 3 most dominant left-handed relief pitchers in the history of Major League Baseball. So he waited his 10. He got in. Ichiro, here's another one, okay? So Ichiro misses 1 vote. He's not unanimous by 1 vote. How is that possible? Like that one guy doesn't vote. Like, did you really think you wanted to make Ichiro wait? You look at his numbers. He's not a Hall of Famer. You go back to, and I only mentioned Mike Schmidt because they did the documentary recently on MLB Network, and I realized that he missed by 17 votes unanimity. How was a guy like Mike Schmidt not a unanimous guy? So I love having the vote. I love being able to. Like I said, it's an honor and a privilege. But there's something with the system. There's too many guys who are able to vote. Like you got to look at it maybe closer to the NFL. The NFL has a smaller group of voters. I've talked to players who are in the Hall of Fame. Maybe they can have input, maybe a committee of 5 guys. Whatever it is, I think it needs to be tweaked at some point. But it's always cool to see. At least we have guys going in. When was it? 2 or 3 years ago? Nobody went in.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Ken Griffey Jr., how he wasn't a unanimous guy. I mean, hitting over 600 home runs. He was the face of baseball. I mean, Derek Jeter, when you only have a handful of guys that have ever walked planet Earth that have more hits than you, and you're the only one that was born after, 1940 or whatever like that, or after 1960, I think, because of Pete Rose. Yeah, it's kind of wild and certainly a process that needs to be adjusted. Rob, I feel a whole hell of a lot smarter for having you on the show today. I appreciate you so much. Rob Maaddi, follow him, Twitter/X AP Senior NFL Writer. Let's do it again, man. I appreciate it. Stay warm because it's freezing here in the Tampa Bay area.
Oh, man, it's crazy. Absolutely. Keep up the great work, Jay.
Thanks, pal.